Sometimes, the difference between life and death is just half a tank of gas, a dead cell phone, and a wrong turn at a fork in the road. In the mountains of Oregon, such simple mistakes can be fatal. The Pacific Northwest, with its mesmerizing beauty, takes its toll every year on those who underestimate its grandeur. In the winter of 2006, temperatures in the Oregon mountains dropped to 21.2 degrees F, and snowstorms turned narrow dirt roads into treacherous traps. Asphalt gave way to slush, and cell phone reception disappeared between tall pine trees and steep cliffs. Here, in these mountains, where fog hides precipices and blizzards bury road signs, even modern navigation systems are useless. Locals cherish memories of tragedies on these roads as part of the region's folklore. In 1994, DeWitt Finley, a motorhome salesman from Montana, became one of the stories rangers tell tourists as a warning. His car, stuck in the snow on Bear Camp Road, was found months after he disappeared, but by then hunger and exhaustion had already taken their toll. There are places where the line between adventure and disaster is razor thin. For the Kim family, that line was somewhere between turning off the main road and the first snowflakes falling on their windshield. What started as a routine drive home would soon become a story that would forever change the rules of rescue operations and force us to take a new look at the value of human life. James Kim was no ordinary family man. At 35, he had already built an impressive career in technology, becoming senior editor at CNET, where his reviews of MP3 players and digital audio devices were read by hundreds of thousands of people. His video podcasts and Lab Rat segment turned serious technical reviews into an entertaining show. His colleagues valued him not only for his professionalism, but also for his boundless enthusiasm, a quality he brought to his family life. His wife, Katie, a 30-year-old owner of 2 successful boutiques in San Francisco, was the perfect partner, creative and business-minded with refined taste and an entrepreneurial streak. She grew up in the harsh environment of New Mexico, which would later prove to be a critical factor in her survival. Their daughters, 4-year-old Penelope, with her lively eyes and restless nature, and 7-month-old Sabine, just beginning to discover the world, were the center of their universe. For James and Katie, children were no obstacle to adventure. They took them everywhere, from road trips along the coast to hiking in the mountains. In the fall of 2006, the Kim family was on the verge of change. James and Katie were seriously considering moving from San Francisco to Seattle or Portland, places with a more relaxed pace of life and greenery, ideal for raising children. A trip to Seattle for Thanksgiving was not just a family visit, but also a reconnaissance mission. They were checking out the city as a potential new home. A festive dinner with the family, walks through the rain-soaked streets of Seattle, and discussions about business and job opportunities filled them with enthusiasm before they returned home. They spent several happy days enjoying each other's company, planning for the future, and unaware that the return trip would change their lives forever. On Friday, November 24, 2006, the Kim family began their journey home from Seattle. The route included a stop in Portland, where Katie planned to meet a friend for lunch. This meeting influenced the course of events that followed. After lunch, the family decided not to drive all the way to San Francisco, but to split the trip in 2, stopping for the night in a picturesque location. The couple unfolded a Rand McNally paper map, a familiar sight in 2006, when GPS navigators were not yet an integral part of every car. On the map, they noticed Tudo Tuno Lodge on the Oregon coast near Gold Beach, an ideal place to stay, located about halfway between Portland and San Francisco. Katie called the lodge and booked a room. Terry Stone, who took the reservation, was slightly concerned about the late arrival of a family with small children, but James was determined to stay there. The family left Portland in the afternoon and headed south. Around 9 p.m., they stopped for dinner at a Denny's restaurant in Roseburg. Tired after a long day with 2 small children, they studied the map, trying to determine the best route to Tututun Lodge. According to their plan, they had about 2.5 hours to drive to the lodge. After leaving the restaurant, they were supposed to turn onto Highway 42, which leads to the coast. But in the dark, exhausted from the road, they missed the turn. Realizing their mistake, they stopped to study the map again. The map showed an alternative route, a road called Bear Camp Road, which also led to the coast. On paper, it looked like a perfectly acceptable option. But what the map didn't show was critically important. Bear Camp Road was a narrow, winding mountain road, unmaintained in winter, with steep, unguarded drops rising 4,000 feet. None of the Kims knew that this seemingly ordinary road had a grim reputation among locals. They didn't know about DeWitt Finley, whose fate could have served as a warning. They simply trusted the map and turned onto the road that promised the shortest route to their destination. The first few miles of Bear Camp Road held no promise of trouble. The narrow but paved road wound its way into the mountains. However, as they gained altitude, the situation changed rapidly. Snow began to fall, significantly reducing visibility, and the temperature dropped with every 100 feet of elevation. About 2 hours' drive from the restaurant, James realized they had lost their way. At mile marker 12, where the main Bear Camp Road turns and looks like a secondary road, and the road leading off to the side looks like the main road, they made a fateful choice. Perhaps due to the snowfall, fatigue, or simply the deceptive configuration of the intersection, James turned onto a narrow logging road instead of following the main road. This split-second decision proved to be a turning point. The road was not just impassable in winter, it had been abandoned for the cold season. The entrance should have been blocked by a barrier, but for some reason there was none. Nothing prevented the Kims from turning onto it. The road became increasingly difficult to navigate. Snow accumulated, the ruts grew deeper, and obstacles such as branches and rocks became more frequent. James drove with extreme caution, clutching the steering wheel, the windshield wipers working at full power. At times, the road was so blocked that he had to stop and get out to clear the way. Katie tried to call 911, but there was no signal. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, she told James that they needed to turn around and go back the way they came. He agreed, and for several hours James drove the car in reverse along a narrow, winding road with steep drops on one side. This maneuver required incredible concentration, especially with limited visibility in unfamiliar terrain. Finally, they returned to the fork they had seen several hours earlier and decided it was too dangerous to continue. Besides, James was exhausted and thought it would be better to spend the night there and assess the situation in the morning. When they woke up the next morning, November 26th, the Kim family found themselves at a three-way fork in the road. They studied the map, trying to determine their location. They had a choice: return along the same dangerous route they had taken the day before, or try to turn left and descend the mountain. The road on the left looked wider than the ones they had been on, but there were no signs. In the end, they decided to stay put, believing that being at the fork would increase their chances of being found. The situation was becoming serious. The Kim family was trapped among mountains, remote canyons, and logging roads leading nowhere. They had seen a snowplow at the entrance to Bear Camp Road and hoped that it would pass by regularly to clear the road. But the machine did not appear on the first day or the second. The temperature was dropping, food supplies were dwindling, and 4 pairs of eyes were looking less and less at the road and more at the sky, the endless, empty, indifferent sky from which rescue might come. But the sky remained silent. In this silence, only 4 beating hearts remained, and a decision that would soon have to be made. In the first days of being stuck, the Kim family strictly rationed their resources. The engine was only turned on for short periods of time to heat the cabin, making gasoline a precious resource. The temperature outside regularly dropped to 21.2 degrees Celsius, seeping through cracks in the doors and windows, and forcing the family to huddle together to stay warm. Food supplies quickly became a critical issue. The initial supply, a few bags of snacks, baby food for Sabine, a couple of boxes of rice cereal, and bottles of water, was meant to last a day or two on a normal trip. By November 28th, Food was running out, and Katie made a decision that would ultimately save her daughters' lives. She resumed breastfeeding not only for 7-month-old Sabina, but also for 4-year-old Penelope, who had long since been weaned. Every morning, James surveyed the surrounding area, trying to find signs of a road under the incessant snowfall. The couple tried to contact 911 every day, but there was no cell phone signal in the mountain canyon. Outside the window, there was only a silent white expanse with no sign of civilization. By the end of the week, the psychological tension was mounting, but for the sake of their children, the couple maintained a visible calm. They played with Penelope, sang songs, told stories, did everything they could to ease the oppressive atmosphere of isolation. The metal body of the minivan became a small island of life in the winter desert, where every sound from outside was perceived as a potential rescue, but invariably turned out to be just a trick of nature. James's expression changed with each passing day. Usually optimistic and energetic, he became increasingly focused and silent. By the dim light of a flashlight, he studied the map, obviously pondering some serious decision, but he did not share his thoughts with Katie. The 7th day of being stranded, December 3rd, was marked by a critical event. They ran out of gas. The last drops of fuel burned in the engine, and with them went their main source of heat. The minivan that had served as their shelter turned into a frozen metal box. James decided to use a tire for a signal fire. After removing the wheel with incredible effort, he lit a heavy black smoke in the snow, a universal sign of distress. Weakened by hunger and cold, he methodically kept the fire going, throwing branches and combustible materials from the car onto it. Katie watched from the window as he, covered in soot, struggled to raise the signal above the treetops. A brief hope arose when a small plane flew overhead. The silhouette of its fuselage seemed so close that the smoke from the fire must have been visible. James signaled desperately, while Katie hugged the girls in the car, whispering words of hope. However, the aircraft flew over them and disappeared behind the mountains without changing course. They were not noticed. That moment was a psychological turning point. The black column of smoke, their last hope for passive rescue, dissolved into the air along with their belief that they would be found just waiting in the car. In the evening, when the children were asleep, James and Katie had the most difficult conversation of their marriage. By the dim light of a flashlight, James studied the map, marking their approximate location and drawing a line to the nearest town, Gallus. According to his calculations, it was only 4 miles on foot, 4 miles through the winter forest to where there were people, phones, and help. "If I don't go, we'll all die here," he said, looking at his sleeping daughters. Katie objected, afraid to let him go alone in a snowstorm without proper clothing, food, or communication. But deep down, she knew that the alternative was the slow death of her entire family in a frozen car. The approaching night became a time of difficult decisions. James would leave at dawn, taking with him a backpack, a map, and some water. He would find help and return for his family, their only chance. The couple discussed the details. What to do if he didn't return by a certain time, how long to wait, what steps to take. Some things remained unsaid. They were too frightening to voice. Early in the morning of December 2nd, 2006, at 7:45 a.m., James left the car, promising to return before sunset. He was wearing tennis shoes, the worst footwear for a winter hike, a light jacket, and jeans. The only useful items he had with him were a backpack with a map, a lighter, and a bottle of water. This equipment, catastrophically inadequate for winter mountain conditions, sealed his fate. For Katja, a period of agonizing waiting began. Every minute stretched into an eternity as she tried to keep the children occupied with games and stories, but her gaze kept returning to the clock and the window. Without a working engine, the car turned into an icebox, and Katja had to force her daughters to move around and do simple exercises, anything to generate even a small amount of heat. 13 hours, the time James had promised to return, came and went, but he was nowhere to be seen. Katie got out of the car, peered into the forest, and shouted his name. But the echo of emptiness was the only response. The terrible truth began to sink in. James had gotten lost, or worse, had been unable to withstand the cold. The chances of surviving the night in the forest in sub-zero temperatures, without shelter or warm clothes, were slim. Darkness was gathering outside the window, and there was no contact with the outside world. According to Katie's calculations, they should have returned to San Francisco on November 27th. Now, it was December 3rd, and it seemed unlikely that anyone was looking for them. On December 4th, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Katie made a difficult decision. James had not returned, so she would have to act on her own. She dressed the children in all the clothes she could find, took a minimal supply of water, and the most necessary items, including a pink umbrella, a bright spot that would attract attention from the air, and a mirror from her makeup bag to signal for help. Katie's first steps in the deep snow were extremely difficult, especially with Sabine in her arms and Penelope, whom she had to practically carry. After walking a few hundred feet, she realized that they would not survive in such conditions. At this critical moment, something happened that would later be called a miracle. Katie heard a mechanical sound that stood out sharply from the natural rustling of the forest, the sound of a helicopter engine. A helicopter passed over the treetops, and Katie instinctively began waving her bright umbrella, running out into a relatively open space. The helicopter circled once, then twice, and began to descend. Thus ended 9 days of isolation for Katie and her daughters. John Recor, a local businessman and pilot from Central Point, acting on his own initiative, discovered the family and radioed the rescuers. Soon, Katie, Penelope, and Sabine were taken to Three Rivers Community Hospital in Grants Pass. At the time of her rescue, Katie believed that James had probably already reached civilization and organized a search, but the reality was different. Instead of 4 miles to Gallus, as the map showed, the actual distance was more than 15 miles through impassable terrain. James overcame incredible obstacles and walked more than 16 miles. A phenomenal distance for a man in his condition. Following the river in the hope that it would lead him to people, James ventured deep into the steep-sided Big Windy Creek Canyon. He scrambled over slippery rocks, climbed over fallen trees, and crossed icy streams. Every step was an act of willpower, but he kept going, knowing that his family depended on him. James Kim's body was found at noon on December 6th, lying in the icy waters of Big Windy Creek. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was hypothermia, and he had died approximately 2 days after leaving the car. His sacrifice was not in vain. It was James' absence that prompted rescuers to expand the search area and commit maximum resources. The tracks he left in the snow helped determine the family's route and the location of the minivan. As Joe Hyatt, who led the search team, said, "He showed what a tremendous love he had for his family." While events in the Oregon mountains unfolded with tragic inevitability, outside the snow-covered forest, the hidden mechanisms of the search operation were just beginning to get underway. James' colleagues at CNEAT, concerned about his absence from the office, filed a missing person report with the San Francisco police on November 30th, 2006. Katie's boutique manager, Charlene Wright, also contacted the authorities, noting that her employer had not returned on time. The San Francisco Police Department quickly discovered that the Kim family had used a credit card at a Denny's restaurant in Roseburg on November 25th. This information redirected the search to southern Oregon, but the initial search area remained vast and undefined. Without precise information about the family's route after dinner, the situation seemed almost hopeless. On December 1st, search coordinator Josephine Sarah Rubrecht and Deputy Sheriff Jason Stanton visited Bear Camp Road, intuitively aware of its reputation as a winter trap. However, without clear landmarks, it was impossible to find any traces of the minivan. The search remained chaotic due to a lack of resources and centralized leadership. Meanwhile, Spencer Kim, James's father, couldn't sit idly by. He flew out of his home on the East Coast to Oregon and hired 3 helicopters from Carson Helicopters, based in Merlin, to join the search. His decisive actions would later play a critical role. The breakthrough came on December 2nd, when Edge Wireless engineers Eric Fuqua and Noah Pagsy, acting on their own initiative, analyzed cell tower records. They discovered that the Kim family's phone had sent an automatic ping to a tower in Wolf Creek at 1:30 a.m. on November 26th. This narrowed the search area to the Bear Camp Road area, but the use of this data was delayed due to bureaucratic obstacles and privacy laws. By December 3rd, the search operation had expanded significantly. More than 80 volunteers, including local hunters and foresters, joined professional rescuers. The Oregon National Guard sent a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging cameras. Private helicopters hired by Spencer Kim methodically combed the area around Big Windy Creek. John Rekar, a local businessman and pilot from Central Point, knew the area better than most. On December 4th, guided by intuition and local knowledge, he took his helicopter into the air. Rekar decided to check not only the main Bear Camp Road, but also the numerous side roads that were rarely visited even in summer. That was his advantage. He didn't think like a rescuer, but like a local who knew every twist and turn of the mountains. I was following bear tracks, which are round, and suddenly I saw these long, thin prints, Rekar later recalled. From a height of only 10 feet above the ground, he could make out the tread pattern on the snow. The tracks, presumably left by James Kim, allowed the pilot to determine the direction of the search. Then came what the Oregon State Police called a miracle. Rekar spotted a woman waving a pink umbrella, jumping up and down with children nearby. Although his helicopter could not land, a Crowman S-61 helicopter soon dropped a survival kit, and another pilot was able to land 200 yards from the Kim family's Saab. Half an hour later, Katie and the girls landed at Grants Pass Airport in Merlin, ending their 9-day struggle for survival. But the joy of rescue was overshadowed by James's absence. Katie, who initially believed that her rescue had been organized by her husband, was horrified to learn that he had not been found. Now the search focused exclusively on James Kim. Katie provided valuable information about his presumed route and time of departure. Rescuers found tracks leading from a logging road to Big Windy Creek. Pieces of clothing on tree branches confirmed that James had deliberately left markers, possibly for his return journey or to help rescuers. At dawn on December 5th, about 100 rescuers from 7 counties, 2 federal agencies, and the Oregon State Police methodically combed the canyon. Search teams from Eugene and Lane County descended into the gorge, following James's markings. Fragments of the map and clothing confirmed the direction he had taken. Helicopters hired by Spencer Kim dropped food and blankets into the canyon, hoping James was still alive. Their efforts were desperate, but sincere. No one involved in the search wanted to give up. On December 6, 2006, at 12:03 p.m., a Carson Helicopters pilot spotted James' body in Big Windy Creek, half a mile from where the creek joined the Rogue River. James was lying on his back in 1 to 2 feet of icy water. Jackson County SWAT rescuers confirmed his death. A subsequent autopsy determined that James died of hypothermia approximately 2 days after leaving the vehicle. Josephine County Undersheriff Brian Anderson was unable to finish the press conference, breaking down in tears when James' death was announced. His reaction reflected the emotions of the entire rescue team, who in a short time had come to deeply respect a man who sacrificed himself to save his family. The rescue of Katie and her daughters, followed by the discovery of James' body, completed the physical aspect of the tragedy, but its psychological and social consequences were only beginning to unfold. The tech community, where James was a prominent figure, responded by creating a memorial fund to support his daughters. CNET launched an online guestbook where nearly 2,000 people left their condolences and words of support. The Kim family's story quickly gained national attention, becoming one of the most talked about news stories of 2006. CNN, ABC News, NBC, and other major television networks broadcast daily updates on the search and then mournful reports on James' death. Local publications such as the Oregonian and Mail Tribune published detailed coverage, including interviews with rescuers and analysis of what went wrong. The public reaction to the tragedy was a wave of criticism directed at the organizations responsible for road safety and search and rescue operations. Spencer Kim, in an article for the Washington Post on January 6, 2007, pointed to a number of systemic problems: an unclosed road barrier, delayed use of cell phone data, and a lack of unified command in the early days of the search. California Senator Dianne Feinstein sent a letter to Interior Secretary Dirk Kempthorne demanding an investigation into the barrier incident. An investigation by the Bureau of Land Management revealed that 3 employees were aware of the problem, but took no action. However, even with flawless work by rescue services, the outcome could have been the same. The harsh reality of the Winter Mountains left no room for error. A memorial service for James Kim was held on February 18, 2007, in Golden Gate Park, attended by hundreds of people, many of whom had never met him personally, but were moved by his selflessness. The experience of the Kim family led to significant changes in road safety and search and rescue procedures in the region. New warning signs were installed on Bear Camp Road and adjacent roads. John Riker personally installed a bright red sign on Gallus Access Road with the message, "Danger, remote road ahead, you could get stuck and die." A more significant achievement was the creation of the California-Oregon Regional Search and Rescue, CORSAR, which brought together 8 counties for joint training and operations. Rescue Coordinator Sarah Rubrecht noted, "Search and rescue services are 1,000,000 times better than they were in 2006, thanks to relationships, resource sharing, and cross-training." Oregon legislation was changed to simplify access to credit card and phone data in emergencies. The Oregon State Police improved protocols for quickly tracking cell phone pings, and telecom engineers began training rescuers to interpret such data. Katie and her daughter's lives after the tragedy became an example of the resilience of the human spirit. By 2016, the family had moved to the Portland area, fulfilling a dream that she and James had discussed during that fateful trip. Penelope, then 13, and Sabine, 10, grew up to be normal, healthy girls, although according to family friends, they missed their father very much. In December 2009, Katie and her daughters made a surprise appearance at the Josephine County Search and Rescue Christmas banquet to thank the people who saved their lives. This was shortly after she visited the site of the tragedy with Raker and Sarah Rubrecht, where, 3 years earlier, she had breastfed her daughters to keep them alive, and where the family had burned tires for warmth after their car ran out of gas. The physical injuries have healed, but the emotional scars remain. In a rare interview with 20 on 20 in 2011, Katie admitted that she struggles with guilt over the decisions she made on the road, but has focused on raising her daughters. "I have to be strong. They depend on me," she said. The Kim family tragedy is not just a story about the dangers of winter roads or navigation errors. It is a reminder that in the age of smartphones and GPS, it is still possible to get lost in the wilderness, to be overwhelmed by its forces, and that there is no foolproof remedy for human error and bad luck. But above all, it is a story about the power of parental love and self-sacrifice. James Kim, racked by hunger, cold, and exhaustion, walked 16 miles through impassable terrain trying to save his family. Katie Kim, left alone with 2 small children, gave her last ounce of strength to keep them alive. There are now signs in the Oregon mountains warning travelers of the dangers of Bear Camp Road. But the most eloquent memorial to James Kim remains his daughters, who grew up thanks to his final act of love, and the changes to the rescue system that have likely saved dozens of other lives since then. The Kim family tragedy forces us to ask ourselves questions that have no easy answers. What would you have done in James's place? Would you have stayed in the car, hoping for rescue, or risked everything for a slim chance of finding help? Can we judge the decisions of people on the brink of survival from the comfort of our homes? What if the real danger lies not in snow-covered mountains or the absence of roadblocks, but in our own self-confidence? In how easily we trust paper maps or electronic navigators, forgetting that technology is only a tool that can make mistakes. If this story touched you, like it and share your thoughts in the comments. Every tragedy can be a lesson if we take the time to reflect on it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Take care and see you in the next episodes.